Okay, so let's continue talking about the education of Augie Merasty, and we're moving on to chapter 5. He starts detailing some of the physical and sexual abuse that was experienced by himself and the other students at the residential school. And we get a glimpse of one of the abusive instructors who was at the school in chapter 5. This old German brother who goes by the name, or who's called Johann Verwelkend. And he was 65 years old when Augie started school, and he was the shoemaker who had a shop just outside of the main building. The first question on your study question guide there is, who is Johann Verwelkind and what is his cultural background? Well, we know he is a German uh, instructor at the school, and he runs the shoe repair shop. We learn a little bit more about his German heritage in chapter 5. What warnings do Augie's uncles tell him about Verwelkind? Um, on page 29, Augie describes how some of his uncles gave him sort of a warning and told him about this particular person at the school uh, before Augie was a student there. And he says some of the things my uncles told me about him before I arrived at school were a little hard to believe. Then I met him, and so he's warned in advance that by his uncles and others in his family or friends of the family, told him about this one brother Johann, who would abuse the boys. So they're trying to warn Augie to stay away from this one instructor. What kind of abusive behaviors does Verwelkin engage the boys in? So Augie describes how he would um, sexually abuse the boys, and he details how um, acts of molestation and abuse and sodomy of the children who were students at the residential school. So I'm not going to get into the details of the sexual abuse, but it's described in some detail of what Brother Verwelkin would make the children do to him and what he would do to the children. And Augie can't quite understand, how this could go on for so long without any of this man's behaviors being reported to the authorities. By all rights, this person should be in jail for what he did, but it was never reported. It just seems like, something that was kept in secret, underreported, and they turned a blind eye to it. So Augie asks, he says what does Augie hope gets reported to the Truth and Reconciliation Committee? He says, I don't know why this man was not reported to the authorities. I don't know if these boys reported Verwelkin to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I hope so. I can only guess how harmful he was to a lot of us boys. If any of our teachers ever claimed that there was no evidence of sodomy in the school, they were lying. There is no doubt that these things were forced upon many of us at St. Therese in those days. A lot of kids suffered everlasting effects, and no doubt some effects have been carried right to the grave. So that last line there, he acknowledges that, there are psychological after effects of abuse, and in some cases, it might have contributed to the early deaths of some of Augie's contemporaries, his peers, fellow students who maybe the rest of their life has been affected by what they experienced at St. Therese Residential School, and that abuse is a psychological as well as a physical trauma that they were forced to experience as children. So the Truth and Reconciliation committee there that was the uh, government, you know, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission began in 2008, and that's where um, the process began of Aboriginal survivors of residential schools were asked to share their stories. Um, and it was a way, again, to begin this process of reconciliation and inform Canadians about the history of what happened in residential schools and the impacts that they've had on the children who experienced them firsthand, and then also the after effects of how whole families and communities were affected by the residential school experience and those impacts, psychological impacts of that experience. So a lot of people just came forward for the first time with those stories in, we're thinking 2008, and these things went on when they were children. So some people maybe had never spoken about what they experienced as children, because, you can think about the society's sort of stigma against abuse survivors. A lot of people maybe wouldn't have believed them if they did come forward. There's sort of institutional racism as well that prevents, certain people from coming forward and telling their story and being recognized or validated by, police or the courts or judges or anybody in authority. So there's a lot of reasons why some of these stories maybe were carried right to the grave rather than, taken to court, or those stories were kind of buried in society and in the school system itself that kind of tried to hide some of the realities of what were going on at the time. So Augie continues to talk about Johan Verwelkind. And he connects this one instructor with a historical context. We learn about Verwelkind's ideology and his racist beliefs that are situated in his nationalistic belief in Germany as a race of people who, at this time, during World War II, believed in their superiority. Verwelkind, he talks about him being sort of aligned with Hitler and the Nazi Party and supporting the German war effort. So Verwelkind would bring back all these little trinkets and things, cuckoo clocks and stuff that he would sell and then send the money back to support Germany in the war effort. So he was fully supportive of Hitler and the Nazi ideology that presented the Germans as a kind of superior race. And so this is another sort of level or layer of the racism that exists in Canada and how it sort of fits into the larger context of world or global politics at this time in history. But, we think of Canada as sort of, not on the outskirts of World War II, but we can see how racist ideologies exist in every part of the world. So the next question here, who does Augie say Verwelkind worships? What are Verwelkind's racist views? So on page 34 he talks about Verwelkind as a Hitler worshipper, a complete fascist. He always told us kids that Hitler and the Germans were the smartest people in the world, supreme above any other race. So yeah, we can sort of situate Verwelkind as a racist, and his ideology or his belief system is rooted in fascism of Germany at the time and his belief in Adolf Hitler. Why do you think Verwelken was never reported to authorities? Why would they turn a blind eye and a deaf ear to any reports of sexual abuse? So even though Augie, he describes how this one man abused, he estimated up to 700 to 1,000 boys at his time when he was a shoemaker at the school. He was never reported. He was never arrested. He was never reported. He was, as far as Augie knows, there was no punishment or retribution for this man's abuse and crimes against these children. He was never reported to authorities. So Augie does acknowledge that there weren't any, or there were hardly any laws in those days to prevent men from torturing children. There was there were very few laws to prevent child molestation or regulations to get that kind of man to protect the children who were under his in his classroom. And then Augie also acknowledges that the school system, the administration of the schools, turned a blind eye and a deaf ear. So even if they did know that this man was abusive, they turned a blind eye and a deaf ear because they didn't want to ruin the reputation of the church or the school. So often they just would ignore it. If there was evidence of it, they would silence the children or they would ignore the children who came forward with any accounts of abuse.